How does an immortal being deal with death? Welcome to the Immortal Gifts Podcast, where Dave Robison, Veronica Giguerre, and J Daniel Sawyer read my novel, Immortal Gifts, to you. I'm Catherine Filliard, and I wrote this. This episode of the Immortal Gifts Podcast is sponsored by me. If you like the podcast, tell your friends. If you've run out of friends to tell, buy the book. It's available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, large print, and audio. I also have a Patreon and a Ko-fi, if that's your thing. Impatient? The audiobook is available at my shop and my Patreon and will be headed to all the places audiobooks are sold. And with that, on to the show.
Too much attention. Abraham, Rumson, New Jersey, October 17th, 2019. The dog patio at Garden State Pizza was cool and windy, but Ivan sat on the table, glancing around and enjoying the night, much like he had on other visits. I wished I had brought Victoria here, but she'd been dead for over 9 months. Also, she wouldn't have enjoyed it. But we, and Ivan, were regulars. He was a rare cat that enjoyed outings on a leash. I loved the sound of the wind in the trees, and the foliage was at its prettiest. It's a shame that I can only enjoy the fall colors from indoors or after dark. It's my favorite season. Watching it on television or at the movies or on YouTube wasn't the same. There wasn't the wonderful changing leaf smell or the crisp air. I could get those at night, but without the color, which is the best part. I supposed some lovely red and yellow leaves had landed on the patio, but they'd raked most of them away. The waitress put down Destiny's pizza. She'd topped her previous most outrageous eyeshadow, cheetah spots. Instead, she'd painted her lids in sunset colors and drawn little trees in eyeliner tonight, and was wearing an excessive amount of perfume. A few moments later, the manager delivered my beer, a Marzen from Germany. I prefer an amber one in the Munich style, by the way. I inhaled the lovely, crisp aroma from the beer and took a sip. Yes, I can drink. It doesn't sate my thirst, but I can drink. The gate to the patio squeaked open, and a man's voice shouted, "No! Freddie, no!" A medium-sized, short-haired white and black dog raced towards Ivan while a man tumbled after him. A woman rushed inside the fence, calling, "Freddie! Freddie, no!" She was a pale woman with dyed blonde hair with gray roots. I stood and interposed my body between the dog and Ivan, but couldn't move as fast as I'd have liked without outing myself as something preternatural. The dog tried to race around me, and I grabbed him. We wrestled for a moment before he slipped out of my grasp and caught Ivan in his mouth. "You motherfucker!" as the modern Americans say. Destiny screamed. Ivan struggled to flail around in such a way as to get his claws into the dog, but the dog shook his head in that back-breaking motion. There was an iron scent and a splash of blood. I should have been faster, and to hell with the consequences. "Ivan!" I gripped the dog by the collar and glared into his face. "Give me my fucking cat right now, Schweinhund, or I'll snap your neck." Then I seized his mouth with my other hand. I didn't hurt the dog, of course. I only applied a little pressure to the lower jaw, but it was enough to surprise the dog into letting go. Destiny rushed over to Ivan and started examining him. She removed her sweater to press against the bite wound. It reminded me unpleasantly of Inanna's turning. "What the hell? Let go of him!" The dog's owner, a man with graying brown hair and ruddy beige skin, said, "What kind of idiot takes a cat to a dog patio?" I didn't release the dog's collar. I was too angry to speak English, so I stared at the dog as I cursed his master. "Also wasken wir Zibbler mit dem Kappendröd," he He should be buried like an onion with his head in the ground. The dog gazed up at me and whimpered. Good, I thought. You stay there and don't move until we leave. I hesitantly released his collar, and the dog only moved to shrink back from me. I glanced down at Ivan, who was eyeing the dog with a speculative, almost satisfied expression, but made no move to attack, although as a vampire he absolutely could. The dog stared back at Ivan, appearing disconcerted, like he knew Ivan's reaction wasn't that of prey. I shook my head at Ivan, who started washing his paw, then licked the blood off his back, acting very much like a cat who wasn't seriously injured. Apparently Freddy the dog was smart enough to know when he was outclassed. I felt sorry for him, even though I was still furious that he'd hurt Ivan. I picked Ivan up and examined his wounds. They would have been serious if he weren't a vampire. "Your dog attacked our cat," Destiny said, her voice shaking. "We had permission to be here. Leash your dog. If you hurt my dog—" The man knelt and examined his dog's neck and jaw. "He seems to be okay." He glared up at me. "Fuck off, shorty." I am not short. I'm a perfectly normal height for a man in 1841. In other words, about 5 feet 5 inches tall. And to think that in 1841 I assumed it would be my thinness that would provoke comments for all eternity. But then people had the absolute temerity to become freakishly tall. Oh, I understood I was supposed to feel my masculinity was being threatened. Sadly for him, I was raised that a manly man is clean, moral, and, assuming education and leisure, well-read on matters relating to Torah and Talmud. Even today, the nice Jewish boy is polite, studious, and gentle. By such standards, this rude, sweaty, shouting idiot was the opposite of manly. I replied with the finger. So much for polite, but when in Rome, Ivan hissed at the man and his dog over my shoulder. The dog didn't move until the gate was closed, and then he crept under a table opposite the exit. "I'm so sorry," the man's wife said. "You're right. We should have had him on a leash. We just weren't expecting cats." "I understand," Destiny said, though she still sounded shaken. "It's all right. I'm a veterinarian and have had a lot of pets. Come on, Abraham." I headed for the car with Ivan. "That said, please be more careful in the future," Destiny said, her voice sounding more stern with more of a vet's authority. Apparently she had come to the same conclusion I had. "You should always leash a dog with a high prey drive. Next time he could chase another animal into the street and be hit by a car or something." "Yes, of course you're right," the wife said. "It's a dog patio," the man shouted after us. I rest my case. "They could call the police," the wife hissed back. We couldn't call the police. There was someone looking for me. Too much attention. The waitress and the manager were watching us leave with matching shocked expressions. Destiny shoved a couple of 20s into the manager's hand. The manager tried to argue with her, but Destiny was rushing to the car. Ivan's wounds were already closing up. He would have died if he were still a mortal cat. I was shaking, mostly with anger. "I don't think we can go back." I gazed down at Ivan, who was probably sore from the mauling. "At least we can't bring Ivan anymore, which makes it a lot less fun." No, we should never go back. Staying in one place rather than running away from Thomas was one thing. Attracting attention at pizza parlors was another. I didn't know what I'd been thinking. I supposed I hadn't. Destiny shook her head. "I don't blame the dog. I blame the owners, in particular the husband. As the modern Americans say," I said, "fuck that guy." Destiny laughed. Ivan made a motion with his head that might have been cracking his neck back into place. We got all the way home before I realized I hadn't even had the chance to finish my beer. Abraham, Berlin, Prussia, June 20th, 1841. I stood on stage in a pool of limelight in a wood-paneled concert hall. As the concert ended and the house lights, candles and kerosene lamps, came up, I realized the Baron was in one of the expensive boxes. He'd been to all of my public performances. I didn't know whether to be flattered or annoyed. I also noticed a balding man with thick, scraggly fringe and prominent eyebrows in one of the cheaper seats. Thomas was also attending one of my concerts, and I didn't like it one bit. Neither did the Baron, judging from his expression. The Baron had said Thomas wanted to kill me, so I slipped off stage. I was finished for the evening, and I knew the concert hall well. I sidled out a side door and was met by a lovely blonde woman, tall and pale and willowy, dressed entirely in black. Her dress, while otherwise proper, plunged daringly at the neckline, showing a lot of décolletage. Wisps of pale hair escaped her bun and fell artfully over her face. She smelled of roses. She smiled at me and said, "I was hoping to catch you." "Forgive me," I said. "I'm avoiding someone." Her smile broadened, and I glimpsed Fang. She was one of my kind. How had the concert hall attracted so many vampires? Was it me? "Come with me. Those of us who are performers need to stick together." She spoke with a British accent. She gestured and led me to a carriage where a waiting footman opened the door for us. I don't know why I trusted her, but I did. I got in. So did she. The footman closed the door, and we headed down the street at a stately pace. The interior of the carriage was fine wood and plush velvets, but it was too dark to judge the color, or perhaps the velvet really was black. "I was told that you were extraordinary, and it's true." I murmured my thanks. "Whom are you avoiding?" I considered whether to tell her. I bit my lip. She reached over and took my hand, and the gesture disarmed me. "The man I'm avoiding was there when I became what I am. He didn't want the one who made me he didn't want him to let me leave." The beautiful woman's eyebrows drew together. "He wanted your sire to take responsibility for you? I think he wanted him to unmake me or something." Her jaw dropped and she blinked. "Because I'm a Jew," I added. She tilted her head at me. "I see." She considered this. "My maker was similarly concerned about faith." She rolled her eyes. "If I don't accept the religious authority of the Pope, why should I accept the religious authority of the king or queen? I can read now." I liked her. She was her own woman in an age that didn't encourage women to be their own people. I smiled at her. She smiled back. Still, something I'd said was bothering me. Can he? Could I be human again? Live a normal life with my family? I thought longingly of home, of my parents, of being able to keep kosher. She squeezed my hand. "I don't understand what you're asking. Can he unmake me somehow? I might... If that's all he wants, maybe I should let him catch me." The lovely blonde grasped my hand in both of hers and looked me in the eye. "No, Abraham, there is no cure." It was incredibly disappointing. I closed my eyes for a moment. Time to change the subject. "What's your name, by the way?" "My goodness," she said, "where are my manners? I've been most shockingly forward." She released my hand and extended hers to me. "I'm Flora," she smirked. "I should probably introduce myself as Miss Lawson, as I'm now the eldest surviving daughter because of what we are. But I've just pulled a strange man into my carriage." I kissed her cool, pale hand. "I'm here to play a vampire in a stage play." She made spooky hand gestures and giggled. Who better? I was simultaneously alarmed and amused. Was she really so open about what she was? I supposed she wasn't avoiding anyone. She smiled at me. Let's find somewhere quiet to talk. I was torn. I felt like I shouldn't lead her on if I had no intention of marrying her, and the Torah forbids interfaith marriages. On the other hand, what nice Jewish girl would tolerate my new dietary restrictions? I wouldn't be able to use any of our dishes or utensils for my food without trafing them, making them render her food non-kosher. Did that apply to the icebox? I supposed I didn't use the stove. And watching my wife grow old and die and our children grow old and die? Perhaps I should seek a compatible vampire wife instead. I'd have to think about it. I was getting ahead of myself. What can I say? She was incredibly attractive. Still, my cheeks were warm. Surely I wasn't blushing. Talking might be nice. Abraham, Berlin, Prussia, July 8th, 1841. One night, as I left the theater, there were 4 men waiting for me outside the door. They dressed like they had come for the cheaper seats. One of them said, "You have to come with us." I crossed my arms. "I think not." I gave them a long, scornful look and turned to walk away from them. One man grabbed me from behind, and I easily flung him off me. I turned to fight. They were surrounding me now. One pulled a set of chained manacles from among the rubbish and swung them like a sling before striking me with them. He aimed for my face, but I raised my arm to block the blow. Another pulled a wooden club from the alley. Another had a rope. I'd never been in a physical fight before, and I'm not a physically imposing man. That said, the man who'd grabbed me had been no match for my strength. I eyed the men, sizing them up. In the shadows, a man approached. A man with a bald pate and a frizzy, dark fringe of hair, strong eyebrows, deep, calm eyes. Thomas. "I told you," Thomas said, "that you need to decapitate him. That or burn him." All right, now I was frightened. The air suddenly went cold. I didn't understand his enmity, but the man with the manacles said, "What? This skinny little thing?" Oh, fine. Yes, I had consumption when I was turned. I rolled my eyes and pondered that I was going to be privileged to enjoy an eternity of derisive remarks about my slim build. "You can't join the order if you don't obey," Thomas said. This caused a bit of an uproar among the men, and I took that opportunity to run away as fast as I could. "Dio mio," Thomas said, sounding frustrated, and raced after me. Thomas and I tore through the dark streets faster than any horse. I was a little faster because I was running for my life. I ran into the dark places, under bridges, through alleys, and finally found a place to hide next to a rubbish bin in an alley. Thomas ran right past the entrance to the alley and kept going. When I could no longer hear his footsteps, I climbed up the walls. It was easier than I expected, and sat on the roof. So, Thomas was sending thugs after me, and was giving them instructions on the most effective way to kill me without telling them I was a vampire. Perhaps it was time for a change of scenery. Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, November 6th, 2019. I was sitting on the red sectional in my pajamas with Ivan and Inanna, stream binging What We Do in the Shadows. One can only practice violin so many hours a day, after all. When Destiny returned from work, she took off and hung up her puffy coat. She sat down next to me, still in her green vet scrubs, paused the show, and said, "Well, I had a day." I raised my eyebrows and waited. She'd trailed a couple of fallen leaves in with her, and Inanna hopped down to sniff them. Destiny still smelled like disinfectant soap. A woman called in to ask if any of the vets were regulars at Garden State Pizza. Her dog has developed some disturbing symptoms, including a seizure, sun sensitivity, and vomiting, and she wanted to find out if Ivan was sick too. Fuck. So much for keeping a low profile. We really needed to stay out of police reports. I didn't think the dog had consumed enough blood to turn. What? Is that even a thing? Drinking vampire blood is always risky. Draining the blood first increases the odds that it'll take, but... Attention, True Blood fans. Vampire blood is not a drug. It won't make you high, but it might make you undead, depending on how well your body fights it. Perhaps Freddy had an undiagnosed medical condition. Well, he had one now. If they tried to, as the moderns say, put him down, he almost certainly woke up in a refrigerator. Poor thing. Destiny covered her face with her hands. I'm not a good liar, Abraham. I told her Ivan wasn't sick, but she probably could tell that I knew more than I was saying. I sighed. Offering to take Freddy off her hands would probably be suspicious. Very, she grimaced. That poor dog. His owners would have no idea what to feed him. I gazed down at Ivan, who was watching me with his large copper eyes. We can leave town. Leave town? Over the dog? Destiny's voice was high, almost squeaky, so I glanced into her ashen face. Her faint freckles stood out more prominently against the situational pallor. That seems... excessive? Perhaps, but it wasn't like I hadn't done it before many times. I'd gotten comfortable here, which was a mistake. I don't want anyone looking too closely at Ivan's health, nor did I want anyone, particularly Thomas, looking too closely at us. The UK was calling to me again. Destiny bit her lip. My family is here, and my work. You don't need to work unless you want to. Destiny made a face. You know I want to. And I can arrange for you to have vet credentials under a new name, or even a practice of your own. Destiny stood and paced a little. I don't want a new name. I want the nice, normal life I have now. Only Destiny could call having a vampire husband and 2 vampire cats a normal life. This is what made her the perfect wife for me. I smiled and almost laughed, despite the stress of the moment, and said, Is your life really so good that you wish for nothing more than what you have? Destiny blinked at me and blurted out, I want children. We'd discussed this before, of course. I told her I couldn't, that perhaps we could adopt when the time was right. I supposed she decided the time was now. And I'd like you to live forever. With me. That's your way, Destiny said. She sat next to me. The human way is to have children. That's our immortality. I fidgeted and stared at my hands. My kind can't, I reminded her. Flora and I adopted instead. That would be good enough, she said. But a selfish part of me would like to carry the baby. My mother's did the artificial insemination thing. What's the rush? I'm 28, Abraham. Women's fertility declines around 32, and I want 2 children. I've just always wanted the normal life my mother's fought so hard for. I tilted my head at her. Lawrence v. Texas happened when I was 11 years old. When I was 13, my mothers flew to Canada to get married, and they could finally legally marry in New Jersey when I was 22 and in vet school. I winced and made a mental note to hug Morgan and Bridget the next time I saw them. Yeah, she said, I overheard them talking one night when I was 10. If Morgan had died, the state might have sent me to live with my grandparents instead of leaving me with Bridget because Bridget and I weren't legally related. Bridget was legally my roommate. Ouch. Maybe Bridget needed 2 hugs. Yeah, she said. Family values my ass. I sighed. This wasn't the time, not with the accidental vampire dog situation. I suspected this could go badly. On the other hand, perhaps it was time to commit myself to the mortal life destiny wanted. I had my immortal pets. I could give my wife her mortal children, marriage, compromise. If we get through this unscathed, we can do whatever you want. Destiny already had her mouth open to argue with me. She stopped, closed her mouth, blinked. Really? On the condition that we do an infant conversion and raise the child as a Jew, I amended. Complete with Hebrew school. Conversion? What? According to Orthodox and conservative halakha, only children born of a Jewish mother are Jewish. Everyone else needs to convert. I took her hand. I'm assuming, of course, that you don't want to convert. You've never expressed an interest before. Destiny smiled a regretful smile and squeezed my hand. No offense. None taken, I said. In that case, the baby would need to convert. Otherwise, if they decide to be Jewish, they would have to study with a rabbi for a year and then go to the mikveh, while a baby conversion is just going to the mikveh. Mikveh? It's a ritual bath. There are lots of rules, but it's kind of like Christian baptism. Only no one dunks you, you dunk yourself. For a baby, it's 1 second completely underwater. They can still change their mind and renounce their conversion later. This just keeps their options open. All right, she said. I squeezed her hand. Did you have your heart set on raising children in your tradition? My previous children had come with their own faith, alas. Destiny shrugged. Wicca isn't exclusive. We don't care if you're Wiccan or something else. She blushed. I honestly care more that they be a vegetarian. I couldn't help but smile at that. I have no problem with that. If the child was going to end up keeping kosher, which I would have preferred, being a vegetarian would honestly make that easier. Most kosher rules involve meat. We're settled then. Although we need to see how this dog thing plays out. Do you want to have children now? Destiny asked. I did. Hashem help me. I closed my eyes for a moment. I enjoyed being a parent. Abraham, London, England, September 12th, 1898. As the lights came up, fully electric, so modern and no more greenish tint, I bowed to the audience. The hall was round with red and cream arches and decorative spandrels. I couldn't help but notice that once again one of the plush boxes held a pale blond man with rings on all 10 fingers. He had a season pass and never missed a performance. Sometimes he brought friends, sometimes he came alone. He always wept. Tonight's performance was a recent work with a larger symphony, Scheherazade by Rimsky-Korsakov, which prompted a standing ovation at the end. We did a curtain call. People, including whatever Baron von Dunn was calling himself these days, threw roses at the stage. I bowed and picked up some roses for my wife with a smile. Flora also had a box and was holding court there with some of her fans. I bowed again and left, and came back and bowed again, all very flattering. Of course, I'd had a lot of practice. I'd been playing violin for almost 70 years at that point. I worked my way through the crowd and up to Flora's box and handed her a rose. Some of her lady friends giggled. Flora Lawson was pale and blonde and willowy and astonishingly beautiful, and she wore all the latest fashions, only all in black. I didn't know if her charm and wit were some sort of vampire power, or if she'd used the centuries and observation to hone her social skills to perfection. Miss Lawson, you simply must come to my daughter's birthday party. She adores you, one woman said to Flora, a wealthy woman based on her clothing, but I didn't recognize her. Not that my not recognizing her meant much. Flora always teased me that I only had eyes for my violin. Oh, Lady Wallace, you know I'd love to. But as I've explained, Abraham and I can't go out in the sun because of our condition." She smiled and winked, and all the ladies laughed. "I'd be happy to attend something after dark, of course." I was uncomfortable with this line of wit, but Flora had been around longer than I had, and had actually had a sire who taught her lore, so I deferred to her on matters of vampirism. Flora had known Queen Elizabeth. She'd mopped her floors, but had avoided the dreaded pox that had led the Queen to her heavy use of Venetian ceruse to cover the scars. Vampires, or vampires, had been the subject of literature in England since at least Polidori's The Vampire in 1819 and Le Fanau's Carmilla in 1872, but they were enjoying some popularity post-Stoker, particularly in the Penny Dreadfuls, although nothing topped the popularity of the Varney the Vampire serial, 1845 to 1847, and theatrical farces and extravaganzas. Flora not only made a big show of relishing such roles, but also engaged in a lot of winking claims of being a vampire herself, intending that she would be disbelieved. My role in this little drama was that of the patient, long-suffering husband who played along. I'd read all of those vampire books, of course. There's something about seeing yourself represented, even if it's a negative. I was equally uncomfortable with my growing fame, but Lawson wasn't the name Thomas knew me as, after all, and Flora believed firmly in hiding in plain sight. Thomas had said music was the Baron's passion and not his, and to the best of my knowledge, he was still on the continent. The well-dressed woman, Lady Wallace, turned to me and smiled, clasping her hands in a show of delight. "Mr. Lawson, your playing was divine tonight. You're very gifted." I bowed and murmured that she was too kind. I don't need to point out that the name they gave me at birth isn't Lawson, do I? That was Flora's choice of name. "Please bear upon your wife to make an exception just this once," Lady Wallace continued. "The two of you would be the hit of my daughter's birthday." I smiled. "Thank you, Lady Wallace, but my wife and I are on a strict evening schedule as performers. The constant late nights wreak havoc with one's sleep schedule." I glanced at the back of the box, where two children, a dark-haired boy and a blonde girl, were curled up asleep on the floor. Speaking of late nights, John and Eliza were unrecognizable as the street urchins we'd taken in. They were clean, healthy, and dressed in the finest clothes money could buy, and we had a governess for them. John was 8 and Eliza was 5. Despite not really having a schedule, they would fall asleep during my concerts. I was teaching them both music. I loved them with all my heart. My only regret that I wasn't raising them as Jews, but they already had a faith when we found them. My people believe that the righteous of all faiths, or no faith, for that matter, have a place in the world to come. So my regret was grounded in, as the Talmud says, a desire to replace myself on earth and continue the traditions of my father and mother rather than any kind of fear for their immortal souls. Then again, what with the horrible situation in France with poor Dreyfus, perhaps it was just as well that they were Christian. "Yes, we should put them to bed," Flora said. "My apologies, ladies, but motherhood calls." I handed Flora my Stradivarius in its case and picked up Eliza and held her in one arm and held John's hand in the other. Eliza sleepily wrapped her arms around my neck, and John yawned and blinked. Flora and I took the stairs down to where the carriage was waiting. When we got home, I took them upstairs to the spacious nursery with all the dolls and toy trains and put them in bed. Flora tucked them in, and we headed downstairs. A brown tabby, Ruth, was waiting on the sofa for us. Ruth, believe it or not, was a direct descendant of Rebecca. She immediately climbed purring into my lap. Her latest batch of kittens pounced and wrestled on the floor, occasionally squeaking if a sibling accidentally bit too hard in play. We had servants, of course, including a lady's maid and a valet. We pretended for them that we went to bed late every evening and slept in late every morning in a huge four-poster bed Flora had draped in black for the mystique. There were coffins hidden in a locked room in the basement, but we don't need a full 8 hours a night. In fact, we nap only rarely. There were no maids paid to let us drink blood like the Baron had had. Our home was free of rats, for which we credited Ruth and her progeny. Sometimes someone would try to rob us while leaving a theater or concert hall, much to their sorrow. New vampires need more blood than older ones, so this sufficed. We couldn't simulate full chamber pots, but the staff was too well-mannered to question us on this point. It was Flora who told me, on one of those nights, we couldn't have children of our own. Some human women claimed to have had children by a vampire, but Flora insisted they were all covering for affairs by blaming their pregnancies on their dead husbands. She said this is also the origin of the myth of the sexually insatiable vampire. In my experience, we have the same sex drives we had as mortals, although some of us grow curious or jaded over the centuries. That said, I can still picture the pale curves of Flora's hips and breasts in the moonlight, bright against the black velvet coverlet. I remember the silky soft feel of her bare skin under my hands, the taste of her lips, the faint scent of perfume, the brush of her loose hair across my face and chest. Lying in bed with Flora, whispering conversation all night while we pretended to sleep, was my favorite part of the day. Judaism considers marriage to be the ideal state, and I agree. That night, high-pitched child screams interrupted our time alone. We threw on dressing gowns and raced to the nursery. Eliza was sobbing in bed while her governess, Miss Robinson, a short, stout, square-faced woman, stood over her with crossed arms.
"Do stop, you ridiculous child. You're not allowed to wake the entire household. Hold out your hand."
She produced a ruler from her pocket. John got out of bed, stood between the governess and his adopted sister, and crossed his arms. He stared up at Miss Robinson with a grim resignation.
"What's going on here? Mr. Lawson, I'm so sorry. Your daughter woke the household for no reason at all. I'll take care of it."
I walked over to Eliza and hugged her. What happened?
"I don't want to die,"
she whimpered. Tears streamed down her face. I pulled her closer and kissed her on top of her head. I'd make sure nothing happened to her.
"Eliza had a nightmare,"
John said.
"It's all right."
I gave Eliza another squeeze.
"You're not going to die."
Eliza sniffled.
"The little girl in the book Miss Robinson read to us died."
Her lower lip trembled, and another tear slid down her cheek. Her mother had died of consumption, coughing up blood and wheezing and gasping for air, clutching her chest, in front of Eliza. I gazed at Miss Robinson, who drew herself up and squared her shoulders.
"It's a perfectly normal book intended to elevate the spirits of young children. She's going to punish Eliza for having a bad dream."
John had run away from an alcoholic home to escape beatings and wouldn't stand for them, not for himself nor for other children. I admired his courage.
"Miss Robinson,"
Flora said, her voice heavy with disappointment.
"We discussed this with you when we hired you. We're very opposed to corporal punishment."
We had been opposed since the Eastbourne manslaughter case, in which a teacher had beaten a teenage student to death. That had been 40 years previous, so Miss Robinson wouldn't have followed the case.
"Children won't learn without correction,"
she replied.
"I'm sorry, but no one can actually teach under these conditions. With respect, you and your request are highly eccentric."
Flora stared at her for a moment, then burst into loud peals of laughter. This was apparently not the reaction Miss Robinson expected. Since Miss Robinson didn't appear to understand the joke, I elaborated.
My wife likes to tell people we're vampires to promote her career, and as such, we don't go out during the day, refuse to attend religious services, avoid garlic, and leave the curtains drawn tight at all times. But asking you not to beat our children is what makes us highly eccentric?
Miss Robinson scowled at me. I skimmed the book on the nightstand. It was a gruesome description of a pious child dying, so I threw it on the fire.
We'll have no more of that.
Eliza appeared surprised and grateful. Miss Robinson opened her mouth and closed it again.
Miss Robinson,
Flora said, using her most charming voice,
I agree. We're highly eccentric. But I believe that the rate at which you're compensated and the quality of your living quarters and meals should make our odd demands more palatable. Yes, I have no objections to any of those things, she said. I apologize, but I really must. Your services are no longer required, I interrupted. Please pack your belongings and leave. I'll have your final pay in the morning. In the meantime, I must ask that you no longer interact with our children.
John was staring at me with immense, grateful eyes, his lips slightly parted. I smiled at him, and he rushed forward and hugged me. As far as I was concerned, John and Eliza were perfect in every way.
Thank you, Miss Robinson, that will be all,
Flora said, her voice firm. She stared at Miss Robinson until she had left and closed the door behind her.
Of course, now we have to hire a new governess or send them to school. Education is the law. I won't be sending them to one of those dreadful boarding schools where the pupils are gnawed by rats. And Miss Robinson might be sadly correct about the prevailing philosophy of education in day schools, so we'll have to hire someone.
Flora glanced over at John and Eliza and said,
Can you sleep?
Eliza nodded, her expression solemn. John eyed the door for a moment and nodded. We wandered off back to bed.
Can we turn Eliza, if she's that afraid of death?
I whispered.
No,
Flora whispered back.
If we do it now, she'll never age. We can give her that choice when she's fully grown.
We went downstairs earlier than usual to pay Miss Robinson and see her off, and for breakfast, which comprised tea and bits of kipper sneaked to the cats when the staff weren't watching. Once John caught me in the act, and I pressed a finger to my lips and winked at him. He giggled. Flora arranged for an advert for a new governess. Eccentric couple opposed to corporal punishment seeks philosophically aligned governess for 2 children.
Destiny. Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey. November 19th, 2019. We were having a baby. Okay, I wasn't pregnant yet, but I'd always wanted children and the life that Morgan and Bridget had fought so hard for. They'd had so much paperwork. Medical power of attorney, house in both names, bank accounts, wills, living wills, to simulate what heterosexual people got when they got married. When I was a girl, I always wanted baby dolls. My Barbies got married, and I used Skipper as Barbie's daughter rather than her sister. When I played The Sims, I would always try to have big, happy families, and my Sims were all family Sims. I went through a phase where I would dream that I was pregnant. I guess my biological clock went off early and often. Sometimes I would dream that I'd adopted children off the street. Not that I'd wanted to drop out of vet school or whatever, but, you know. Also, my previous partners were often, but not always, women. I didn't discriminate. I was an equal opportunity dater. I curled up on my side, and Inanna worked her way under my arm and pressed her back against my chest. Such a sweet girl.
Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, November 20th, 2019. Destiny slept. I'd finished binging What We Do in the Shadows. Vampire orgies. I'm sure that there are vampires who attend orgies somewhere, but all the ones I know are ridiculous fuddy-duddies. I was always shy. I suppose that if Flora had had a burning urge to attend one, I might have considered it. Yes, I still love Flora. Still. Always. I'm not being unfaithful to Destiny, nor am I unfaithful to Flora in loving Destiny. I think I've heard it attributed to Isaac Bashevis Singer, but I just searched online and apparently it's Romain Roland. Everyone, deep down within, carries a small cemetery of those he has loved. My graveyard is full. It would take a very long time to enumerate the losses, but I remember them all. From the first, my grandfather, to the latest, Victoria. I still miss the late nights talking with Flora. Still sometimes have a flash sense of memory of being enclosed in a curtain of blonde hair moving over me. But that's gone forever, and I have to commit to that now. I don't begrudge Destiny, her need to sleep, only her mortality. I thought again of the idea that before I was born, my soulmate and I were a single soul that was shattered into two. I always found that idea romantic, until Flora died. Declaring either Flora or Destiny my bashert, the word literally meant destiny, I suddenly realized, felt like infidelity to the other in a way that two marriages over a century apart didn't. Could a person have more than one soulmate? I pulled out the cat fishing pole. Inanna blinked at me lazily, but Ivan leaped around the room with vampire speed and tore the feathers off. He trotted away holding them, looking proud. I took them back when he lost interest and tied them back onto the pole. He'd been an impressive little athlete before, but now he broke the pole a second time. He dropped the feather bundle and headed to the back door, then gazed at me, expectant. I walked over and peered out the glass. A medium-sized, sad-eyed, filthy black and white dog sat on our back porch. He was so dirty that only the vague sense that he was like Ivan told me he was the dog from Garden State Pizza. "Hello, Freddy," I said, and wondered if his idiot owner was looking for him. I opened the door, letting in a blast of freezing air, and he walked in, whimpering, head hanging, tail between his legs. He smelled appalling, like he'd gotten soaked and rolled in a pile of rotten roadkill. I could tell he was thirsty, so I closed the door and offered him a dish of cow's blood, which he lapped up. Then I said, "Well, Freddy, you stink, and it's time you had a bath." Freddy stared at me for a moment, then followed me to the cast-iron clawfoot tub where I washed him. I dried him with a towel and patted him. "You're a good boy," he responded by thumping his tail a few times. I wouldn't say he relished the bath, but he appeared relieved to no longer smell like enthusiastic decomposition. Ivan came in and gazed up at Freddy, who lowered himself onto his belly and gazed up at Ivan. They sat like that for a moment, and then Ivan bumped noses with Freddy and licked him briefly on the face. Ivan is the best boy. Having a cat sire is a dog's worst nightmare, but Freddy had lucked out. Inanna would have made his life a living hell. "What are you doing here, Freddy?" I asked. But I knew. On some level, he knew we knew what he needed, and his instincts had brought him to Ivan for help, just like I can always pick out Baron von Dunn in a crowded room. He seemed to always find me when I was performing publicly, no matter where I was or what name I used. We still had a dog bed from our last foster, and I set it up for Freddy and patted it. He jumped in, appearing grateful, and slept. I tied the feathers back onto the catfishing pole and put it away. If his owners, his previous owners, assumed he'd run away. That might be the best possible solution. I would take responsibility for my grand fledgling, like I took responsibility for all my fledglings. When morning came, I would tell Destiny we had a dog again. I hoped Freddie would be friendly to Destiny's mothers next week over tofurkey. I'd have to pretend I had a non-contagious stomach malady, of course. Abraham, London, England, December 14th, 1899. I'd received an unsigned note asking me to meet, so I'd left my violin locked in my dressing room and was standing out in the park in the snowy dark next to a fountain. I knew, somehow, who my correspondent was, so I was unsurprised when the man I knew as Ludwig von Dunn came out of the shadows. We stared at each other for a moment. He still wore his blonde hair in a soldier's queue and had rings on all 10 fingers, but had finally adapted to modern clothes, ostentatious, expensive-looking ones in a bright royal blue. "Abraham?" he bowed. "Baron." I didn't. There was an awkward silence, and then he said, "I've been very proud of you, Abraham." I stared, surprised. He shook his head. "I realize now that I have wronged you, but you've done magnificently for yourself despite me and my failings. I hope you'll consider forgiving me." I tilted my head at him. "I've come to realize," he blew out a large breath and continued, "I'm not saying this as an excuse, more of an explanation. I'd never met anyone of your faith before and had nothing but the prejudices of my youth to inform my reaction. After observing your behavior and reading your Moses Mendelssohn and much personal reflection, I have come to realize those attitudes are incorrect." He bit his lip. "More than incorrect. Immoral." There was an awkward pause. On the one hand, I genuinely appreciated the apology. On the other, he still couldn't bring himself to say the word Jew. Finally, I said, "It's our tradition that you make amends first and then ask for forgiveness." "Tell me what I need to do to make amends, then." I bit my lip in thought. "It's a fair question," I admitted. "I honestly don't know the answer." We stared at each other for another awkward moment. Curiosity warred with exasperation, but both had the same question. "Why now?" I asked. "You don't even like me. How can you think that?" He took a step forward, but stopped. He stared at the ground. "I love you, Abraham. If I could have adopted you as a son, I would have. And your gift, I was simply shocked. Adopt me? What?" Those sidelong glances he'd given me when he thought I wasn't watching were not paternal. "I was just a man who played violin for you." Also, I already had a family. The Baron appeared to be my age, but of course was much, much older, I realized. "There's a gentleness, intelligence, and sensitivity that comes out in your music," he said, "and you've always been modest. With respect, Baron, you don't know me. You just admire my playing, which is kind of you and flattering, but is not the same thing as being my friend." He rocked back on his heels, but he said, "I understand your point, but that is again my failing as a man. Please give me permission to call on you at your home sometime." I sighed, capitulating at the insistence of my better nature. "You may, but please arrange a time first to ensure that we aren't busy." "I will. Thank you," he said. "Thank you for being more reasonable than I deserve." It was perhaps indelicate to ask at this juncture, but hopefully he would understand. "Have you heard from Thomas lately?" "He's up to his usual rabble-rousing in the slums," the Baron said, and curled his lip. So, closer than I liked, but no sign of him yet. I'd discuss it with Flora later.
Thank you.
We tipped our hats to one another, and I turned towards home. There was a faint orange glow in the house's vicinity. I glanced over my shoulder at the Baron, who walked over behind me and looked. I hurried in the house's direction. The glow grew brighter as I walked. A fire engine pulled by a team of horses and escorted by barking Dalmatians raced down the street past us. I picked up the pace. If the house on fire was close enough to ours, we would have to evacuate. There were bright orange sparks shooting up into the sky and shouts and screams. Was it the Wilsons, who had children who played with John and Eliza sometimes? If one of our neighbors lost their home, Flora would offer to let them stay. Or the Smiths. Were the Smiths watching all their possessions going up in smoke? As I rounded the corner at a run, well, it was not the Wilsons or the Smiths. It was us. Our house. Our home was a barely recognizable nightmare mass of orange light and black charred wood. Sparks shot up into the sky, the roar of flames, men shouting, and the hissing of water pouring onto the fire dampened the sound of screams. Some perverse part of my mind tried to identify each scream. That was a child's scream. A woman screamed. I think it was Miss Nussey, the governess whose sister had died of abuse at a boarding school. That scream was probably a cat. There was a scent like cooking meat, but buried under the stench of burning wood and gas and kerosene and other acrid scents. The house was immense, and we had gas lights. The heat from the fire and the steam was unimaginable. It was exactly as I've heard the Christian hell described. For a moment, all thought, all comprehension completely shut down. I stared dumbly at the blaze for several seconds, and then reason rushed back in. Where was my wife? I needed to get to my wife. I'm not a large man, but it took 4 adult men to hold me back. One of them grabbed my face.
You can't go in there! Flora! I shouted. Has anyone seen Flora? Where are my children? Flora!
A wild-eyed man walked over and shoved a crucifix into my face.
Your wife is in hell where she belongs, vampire. And those poor children are in heaven, safe from whatever evil plan you had for them. I know what your people did in Whitechapel. We all know. The head of our order told us what you were going to do to those children.
Where were my children? My hands balled into fists. There were more screams from women and children coming from the house. They weren't dead. Not yet. At least the children weren't. I broke free and put both hands on his throat and squeezed.
Where is my wife? Upstairs, he said and laughed. Why don't you go get her? Just turn into a bat and fly up there.
There was something in his voice that he was lying. I looked again, looked closer, listened. There was a voice, almost inaudible, over the roar and hissing of flames and water, so I let go of the man and darted towards the side of the house, pursued by a neighbor who stopped before he got too close to the blaze. Someone had piled heavy wooden beams against the cellar door. I ran to the door and started pulling the beams away in a blind panic, my vision tunneling to nothing but the beams. I was moving as quickly as I could, but that still felt like it was too slow.
Help! Please! Help us!
It was Flora's voice. A child was wailing, and Baron von Dunn was beside me, helping me move heavy beams in the scorching heat.
Flora!
I shouted, heaving beams out of the way.
Flora!
We moved the last beam and flung open the door. My heart leapt. Flora stood inside, coughing, holding a screaming, crying Eliza in her arms. John stood beside her, his face streaked with soot and tears, and his arms around her waist. I beckoned to them. "This way! Hurry!" I could almost touch them. "Children first," she said, tugging on John's arm. "This way!" A gas pipe next to the door exploded, throwing me and the Baron back against the fence, and Flora and the children back into the house. Then the entire house collapsed in on itself. In the bright orange haze, I could make out burning wood falling on dark, screaming, writhing figures that were almost certainly Flora and the children. I let out a banshee shriek and threw myself at the house, but hands with rings on all 10 fingers were pulling me away from the fire, and a voice murmured into my ear, "I'm sorry. I can't allow you to go in there. Let me go! Let go of me!" I screamed, but I wasn't able to break free of the Baron's grip as he dragged me towards the front of the house, while I shrieked like a madman. My vision blurred, tunneled, turned into a sea of red as I fought to get to my wife and children, to be where they were. Several other men held the wild-eyed man down on the ground, but he laughed. If Baron von Dunn had let go of me for even a moment, I would have committed murder in front of all those witnesses. I wanted to tear him apart with my bare hands. I struggled to escape the Baron's grasp, but he was too strong. I remember little else, but I found myself in a bedroom in a strange home with a woman I didn't know, wiping my face with a cool, wet rag. I didn't care. I couldn't feel anything at all, no emotion, and my memory of everything after the fire was a blank, because nothing mattered without Flora, John, and Eliza. Eliza, who had been so afraid of death. Brave little John, clinging to Flora's skirt, tear-streaked but still standing. And my beautiful, beloved, immortal wife, my Flora, dead. Also, presumably, my sweet Ruth, the last of Rebecca's line, and probably her kittens as well. Baron von Dunn came into the room, carrying a box. "You're awake," he sat on the edge of the bed. "I know it's soon, but it's presumptuous of me, as always, but I brought you some things." Things. I couldn't care less. I couldn't even bring myself to turn my head. He opened the box and pulled out a violin case. "I brought your Stradivarius in case that might bring you some solace." He placed my concert hall dressing room keys on the nightstand. I knew I should thank him, but speaking took strength I didn't have. "I'll put it here, on the floor, next to the bed. Also, I thought you might like this." He pulled a tiny kitten, orange with white feet and chest, out of the box. "I remembered you like the creatures. I don't know how to care for them myself, so you'll have to help." I reached out and took the kitten. It was a girl, definitely old enough that she was probably weaned. She mewed and curled up on my chest and purred. She was sweet and adorable, and obviously I was going to keep her. But she wasn't my poor darling Ruth. If he'd asked first, I would have said no, not yet. I cried.
You've been listening to the Immortal Gifts Podcast, and I'm your host and author, Catherine Villiard. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happened next, and please rate the podcast to help other people find it. See you next time, and remember, becoming a vampire is a thing that can just happen to you, but being a monster is a choice.